Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you guys with the most up-to-date political, economic and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. Okay, happy Thursday everybody. Yesterday, Wednesday, the People's Bank of China, China's central bank, announced that it will be steadily reducing the number of high-risk financial and banking institutions in order to, quote, fend off systemic financial risks and diffuse bombs in the sector, end quote. In a statement after the so-called study session with the high-level regulators, the central bank expressed that it would go after problematic small and mid-sized financial institutions. With the timing of this announcement, it's tempting to conclude that the waves from banking scares that we are currently seeing in the West are beginning to wash against China's shores. However, as regular viewers know, Chinese leadership has been concerned with their country's deep systemic financial vulnerabilities for some time now. The wording of the official statement is curious too, with external geopolitical concerns and even Marxist terminology seeping into sections on domestic systemic financial risks. For example, quote, "We must continue to prevent and resolve financial risks. We will adhere to the positioning of houses are living in, not for speculation, and promote the steady and healthy development of the real estate market. We will enhance our awareness of risks and struggles and properly respond to containment and suppression by the United States and the West." End quote. While many ministries often use ideological and political language in their statements, for the longest time the consensus in Beijing was to keep this sort of language out of financial regulatory agencies as much as possible. The rhetorical shift in the central bank's statement was noticed by commentators too. Quote, "It's common for government ministries and agencies to hold meetings after major Communist Party and state events in order to show their backing for key policies. However, the People's Bank of China's comments were unusual in repeating Xi's criticism of U.S. containment, phrasing that wasn't used in official statements published by other departments on Wednesday." End quote. Analysts are thus debating what the statements could be signaling. Quote, "This is really a very strange statement for a central bank. My sense is that the central bank is preparing for potential sanctions." End quote. This is certainly a space to keep an eye on, but we shouldn't forget that the main announcement from the central bank is that it intends to reduce the number of high-risk institutions to reduce systemic financial risk. Quote, "But how does reducing the number of high-risk institutions reduce systemic risk? The answer depends on what is causing the rising financial risk in the first place. If it is caused by a group of bad apple banks who do crazy things while the rest of the financial system is able to act prudently, then eliminating these kinds of banks makes sense. But if the problem is systemic, caused by policies that force banks to finance increasing amounts of non-productive projects in order to generate politically desired growth rates, then getting rid of the bad banks will simply shift their behavior to other banks. I would argue that the surge in Chinese debt ratios in the past decade, perhaps the fastest increase in history, makes it pretty clear that the problem is systemic and not caused by the specific behavior of a few risky banks. In that case, the People's Bank of China's actions might make it seem that they are addressing financial risk by concentrating it within a smaller group of larger institutions. But while this may make it easier to monitor the risk, it doesn't really address it." End quote. Of course, one of the other concerns raised by the central bank was the housing sector. So now let's move on to real estate. According to the official numbers published by the National Bureau of Statistics yesterday, property investment by developers dropped 5.7% in the first 2 months of 2023, better than the 12% decline in December and the 10% drop for the 2022 calendar year. Indeed, Chinese developers' investments in new projects contracted since April 2022, with the decline accelerating month on month until this January-February data. During the 2-month period, total property sales by floor area also fell just 3.6% year-on-year, much better, comparatively speaking, than the 24% plunge for the whole of 2022. In short, the property market is showing signs of comparative improvement, going from very bad to just somewhat bad, and increasing optimism among some domestic analysts. Quote, "The increase in residence completion signals that the government push to ensure housing delivery with credit support to developers is working." End quote. However, much of this is on the supply side. Households remain somewhat hesitant. Property sales by value nationwide dropped 0.1% in the first 2 months of this year. though this is much better than the almost 20% year-on-year plunge during the same period last year. The average price of new homes in 100 major cities dropped 0.02% in January. Okay, one more economic development before we move on to the next major story. According to a new report from banking giant UBS AG, the Swiss institution forecasts that Chinese-controlled lithium mines will more than triple output to 705,000 tons by 2025. This would mean that China would control 1/3 of global lithium extraction. Much of this increase would be achieved through expansions in activity in Africa. This, of course, all has geopolitical implications. Quote, "The race to secure lithium is playing out at the highest levels, with nations, including the US, prioritizing access to the materials necessary for making batteries as the world turns away from fossil fuels. China's needs are particularly acute because it's home to the world's biggest market for new energy vehicles." End quote. Hey guys, if you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to hit that like button. It's a huge help. And as always, anyone who can go that extra mile and help me keep the channel sustainable, Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are in the description below. Thank you so much, everybody, for the ongoing support. Next up, we move to the ever-growing Xi Jinping thought ideology, as well as China's ongoing global PR work. I know some viewers don't particularly enjoy these parts of China Update, but it is very important to know what Beijing elites are saying about their own country to themselves, as well as how they're thinking about how to best present their narratives to an international audience. This is very important to cover. On yesterday, in a speech called Walking Together on the Road to Modernization, General Secretary Xi Jinping proposed a new foreign policy initiative called the Global Civilization Initiative. The themes and ideas unpacked in Xi's introduction of the new policy should be familiar to us. We have seen them in recent Beijing statements and speeches on so-called Chinese-style modernization. They also fold into other initiatives like the Global Security Initiative and the Global Development Initiative, both of which were introduced in recent years too. And of course, this new initiative is in part being designed as an alternative to challenge first Western norms and values and then institutions. For example, this is what Xi said in a speech last month. Quote, "Chinese modernization has broken the myth that modernization equals westernization, presented another picture of modernization, expanded the options for developing countries to achieve modernization, and provided a Chinese solution for mankind to explore a better social system." End quote. And this is from yesterday's speech. Quote, "The Communist Party of China will be committed to maintaining international fairness and justice and promoting world peace and stability. Chinese-style modernization does not follow the old path of colonial plunder, nor the crooked path of hegemony after a strong country, but the right path of peaceful development in the world." End quote. She laid out 4 points. 1. Respect for the diversity of world civilizations. 2. Carry forward the common values of all mankind. 3. Attaching importance to the inheritance and innovation of civilization. And 4. Strengthening international cultural exchanges and cooperation. Of course, state media and domestic commentators are trumpeting the announcement of the new initiative and making some characterizations that perhaps some viewers will disagree with. For example, quote, "China has achieved world-recognized achievements in combating the COVID-19 epidemic and has successively proposed the Global Development Initiative and the Global Security Initiative in the field of global governance. The international community has a newer, more accurate, and more positive understanding of the Chinese path to modernization. China has always been an important supporter of multilateralism, while the US is promoting unilateralism, and China's status in the field of global governance has also improved." End quote. Meanwhile, state media and the foreign ministry, likely in anticipation of the narrative and ideological clash in promoting this initiative, are already seeking to contrast it with the upcoming US-led Second Summit for Democracy. Quote, "This so-called Summit for Democracy is against democracy in essence. More than a year ago, the US held a summit in the name of promoting democracy. The so-called Summit for Democracy blatantly drew an ideological line between countries and created division in the world. It was a preposterous show in violation of the spirit of democracy and exposed the US's hegemony in the guise of democracy, which has been criticized and opposed by many countries." End quote. As we have discussed before, China's international PR and ideology struggle efforts will likely be fought largely in the global south, as many of the themes and arguments will not be particularly convincing to many in the West, and, with perhaps the exception of Singapore, developed Asian countries as well as India. However, we should note Beijing is pumping a lot of resources into telling China's story to the world, as its leadership puts it, so we should not be surprised if we see some of these themes and ideas begin to seep into the domestic political discourse of Western countries in the near future. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much everybody for watching. Have a wonderful day wherever you are, and I will see you all tomorrow.